Hello, everybody, and welcome to the What Culture Horror Podcast, hosted by me, Ash Millman, and joined by he, Josh Brown.
Hello, Ash.
And also by she, Kirsten Ria.
Hello.
Hello to you both. Now, on this podcast, we have spent many weeks breaking down the good, the bad, and the ugly of the horror genre, looking at our favourite subgenres, looking at our favourite tropes, looking at the best and the worst parts of kind of all the bits of the horror genre. So it would be remiss to not look at horror movie monsters themselves. So this is just kind of our general little pod on our favourite horror movie monsters, on the best of the bunch that have kind of lasted the ages and made an impression on us, which I think is exciting. I'm excited to talk about monsters, and I feel like a good way to kind of open this up and ask you guys to, give me your monster opinions is, what was your first experience of a horror monster movie, or a monster movie at large, a monster that made an impression on you? What's the one out there that you're like, you think of a monster movie, you think, oh God, that guy?
Oh man, the one that I was properly scared by, I remember genuinely scarring me because I watched it too young, were the crawlers in the Descent. I remember watching that when I probably shouldn't. I was around a friend's house and they put it on and I was way too scared because there was something like, obviously all monsters are inhuman in a way, but I feel like, a lot of the monsters I grew up with sort of had some kind of humanity to them. They had a way of thinking that you could relate to like a human monster. You knew there was something in there. But the crawlers were like the first time I properly saw something that had no real semblance of it, or at least felt kind of like far removed from it, even though they're obviously humanoid and, they probably were former humans that have like evolved or mutated or whatever. They felt so animalistic, and there was something to that animalism, I guess, that properly spooked me because there's no like rationing with it. There's no kind of bargaining. There's no pleading. It's just, they are these animal things, they animal monsters, and they're out to hunt you down in the dark. And I thought, no. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. And I'm very, very scared of it.
Yeah, no, I think my first actual monster movie sort of thing I watched would have probably been like Aliens or The Thing, but even as a kid I don't know why, I guess I was just a messed up kid, but it didn't really scare me. I enjoyed it, but it didn't really scare me. It's only as I've gotten older that I've watched things that I'm like, don't like that. And one that I watched recently, which scared the crap out of me. Like I remember like just being really disturbed by it, and it was actually in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which is a really good film. I really enjoyed it. I thought the monsters in that are really, really good. Like some of them are really silly, but others are really creepy. But it's the great gangling man in I hated it.
Which one is
so
that one?
much. He's like the one that is clearly played by like a contortionist or something, because his head is like facing forward, but like he's all like backwards like this.
Oh, the one that comes down the chimney.
Yeah, he comes down the stairs and like comes down the chimney. I hated the way he moved. I hated the way his face looked. And then not only that, but like he can kind of like pull himself back together. So they try to like lop his arms off and they hit him with a car and he just kind of like pulls himself back together. And I don't know. I think it's just the lore of him as well. Like when they're telling, I think it was like a Native American lad, I think, and he's saying about how it was like a Native American campfire story. It was this great gangling man, which is something I've never heard of. They talk about Wendigos and creepy scarecrows and stuff, and I've never heard of like something, and I remember when I watched the film, I didn't actually hear what he called it because he's like really scared and you can't really make out what he's saying. But oh boy, just watching that thing just crawl around the way it does, and the way that the person who plays this monster like moves is just utterly terrifying. And I remember like my daughter was in the room, and that was like the one moment in the film, like she's not fussed by anything like that, but that was the one moment in the film I was like, this is terrifying, I need to get her out. And I just like grabbed her and I was like, you're leaving. Like it was just, I was like, I cannot scar you for life. Like, it really, really scared me. That was the only monster in the entire film that just really caught me off guard. It seemed like one of those kind of children's horror movies, and it just turned out to all of a sudden just be terrifying. I hated that. It's more newer monsters for me that have really got me off guard, minus the Reagan from The Exorcist, but I don't know if she really counts as a monster. But yeah, well, that terrified me.
Pazuzu does, as his like demonic presence sort of going in. But I think Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I feel like that's kind of an underrated one. Either people really, really hate it, or they're like, oh, it's not so bad. The pale lady was the one that did it for me. Like when she's like sucking people in. I hate monsters that absorb. I really don't like it. It really upsets me. Stuff like the Blob and stuff like the Brothers Grimm, which I've spoke about previously. But when the horse with the spiders in his mouth like swallows the girl, and when the gingerbread thing moves up from the mud and absorbs that girl's face, I hate it. It scars me. I do not like absorbing monsters. I don't know what it is about them. I think it's because they're so far away from like human nature and the way that we kind of work, because we don't touch something and just suck it up through osmosis, but like a monster that does that, really, I really don't like it. I swear there's things in Futurama that are like in jelly. There's in Dungeons and Dragons, there's like jellies that go around that absorb people, and I hate it. I really hate it. I've had nightmares about jelly before. I just don't like it. I really don't like it. But my like therapy session aside, I think there's definitely something to be said for the way monsters have grown with us and grown against us as kind of horror movies and the years have gone on. And obviously monster movies, I feel like you can kind of herald the golden age, the beginning of monster movies with Universal monsters. And I feel like that title for them, the title of the studio, is kind of on the nose because they are a universal fear, like stuff like the werewolves, the Gillman, like fear of the ocean, fear of transforming bodies, all that sort of thing. They kind of each embody a monstrosity that is inherent to human nature. And they're a really good starting point. But even as far back as like literally the inception of cinema, when horror movies were coming in with George Méliès, he even had like monstrous things like a big spider that was attacking a person in bed, or a giant moon coming to the window and like eating people's hands as he tries to fight them off in the nightmare and stuff. There are loads and loads of monsters, and it's something we're always drawn to as something terrifying. So again, with those older examples in mind, what do you guys think that monsters have changed over time? Do you think that they've gotten better, they've gotten worse? Do you feel connected with more? I know, Kirsten, you say it's more recent horror movie monsters that do it for you. Josh, would you say it's kind of the same thing? Would you say that these monsters are a span across time and will get you at any point? Or do you think that you have a connection with certain things at certain points in your life or across cinema?
I think it's certainly like you bring a personal connection to it, because while there are, obviously universal fears, I feel like the best monsters that resonate with you sort of tap into something that you are fearful of, thematically or kind of more abstractly. You might be scared of a werewolf. You might not be scared of werewolves, but you might be scared of what werewolves represent, and how they are lurking in you or whatever. For me, when I was trying to think of examples for this, my favorite horror movie monsters, I actually just ended up with a lot of classics. I really wanted to try and impress you all with some cool deep cuts, but I thought if I'm being truthful, the ones that have stayed with me are like the iconic monsters. They are your Freddy Kruegers, they are your Count Orlok from Nosferatu, they are the Thing from The Thing, stuff like that. But I feel like all the ones that I gravitate towards are the ones that have kind of the duality to them, even though I've just talked about The Descent there and how that scared me because they were so far away from human. I like when that is matched with some kind of humanity, something that you can't control, something lurking inside, like I said there about the werewolf, or, like the fly, something where you're mutating or transforming and you're moving further away from that core kind of humanity. That really freaks me out, that kind of human becoming something else, because I suppose it just taps into fears about yourself, fears about change, fears about decay and stuff like that, and the idea that you might not know yourself. I suppose that kind of more existential dread. And I feel like when it comes to the movie monsters that stay with me, they always have, or usually have, an element of that to them, an element of duality, an element of there's good in there, but it's ultimately not good enough to suppress these, inner urges or this inner kind of reality that you are like a beast or a monster or something spooky, and one day that will overpower whatever good is in there. I don't know. I feel like I'm also turning this into a bit of a therapy session here.
Honestly, it's all coming out, isn't it? It all comes out with monsters.
But I feel like, for me, it's definitely kind of like that I'll latch on to. So it's not necessarily the decades. It's just looking for those themes, those resonant themes throughout cinema. And they do seem to pop up, time and time again. I feel like in the 2010s, we've got a real kind of fascination with body horror again, like contamination and decay, obviously with everything going on around now. It's, unsurprising, isn't it? But that kind of focus on kind of like humanity becoming corrupted or contaminated in some way, like that freaks me out, and I get a bit uncomfortable watching movies about that kind of stuff. But also that's what good horror is, isn't it? It makes you uncomfortable.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think like the reason that things didn't scare me as much when I was a kid is because a lot of the monsters back then were, they were monsters. They were like aliens or Frankenstein, or they were like, weird sort of blobs and things that absorbed things into them, like Ash said. And to me, that just as a kid, just, it's scary and it's fun to watch, but it was more fascinating for me. And I enjoyed them being like, oh yeah, look at the xenomorphs, like they're really cool, but they didn't scare me. And I think the reason that the ones that scare me now as I've got older is because we're getting into more monsters being like what Josh said is like humanoid kind of looking things, or people taking something that's normal and obscuring it to the point where it disturbs you. And I think that's what really scares me about things like the Gangling Man, is taking someone that's a normal person, that when you look at them, but then they can just contort themselves in a way that's completely unnatural. And that's what scares me, is taking something natural and turning it into the unnatural. Even with my other option was Babadook, which is just so terrifying, is having this little child read this book which seems completely normal, completely natural, but then turning into something so disturbing. And just the way he talks and the way he looks, and it's just all that sort of stuff. It's the Babadook, it's the Pell Man from the Labyrinth, having this humanoid thing that sees out of his hands. It's the weird bowler hat like ghost in The Haunting of Hill House that just is really tall and gangly and floats. There's the Crooked Man. I don't like people that don't look like people. It scares me. I don't like it, and it's just, that's the thing that gets me. And I think that's why things scare me now, is because people seem to be going more down that route with monsters, whereas back then it was just cheese. It was just cheesy, like aliens and Sasquatches and blobs and taking it was more sort of like taking aliens or inanimate objects and then turning them into like scary things. Whereas now it's like, no, let's take something that's already alive and you are completely not fussed by, and turn it into something utterly terrifying. And I hate it. I love it, but I hate it.
Yeah. Do you feel like is it the reflection of like the humanity in there, like you say? Is it that does it? It's like, oh, okay, I can see how this connects to what my life experience is, to like being a human, and seeing that subverted? Or is it kind of the potential of anyone be hiding a monstrous trait? Like, what is it exactly about the human part that is the monstrous fear?
I think it's because it's taking something that you would just otherwise see as completely normal. Do you know what I mean? Like, you would think, like, from behind you might be like, oh look, there's a man stood over there with a bowler hat, and then he just kind of grows really long arms and long legs and starts floating towards you. It's like, nope, don't like that. Or you think, oh, what's that shadow doing over there? And then the shadow turns into like a weird spider human. It's just, that's the thing. It's what disturbs me, is just taking something that is completely innocent and normal and then just turning it. And I think it is just the human part of it, because that's something that we know. It's like, oh, well, I'm a human, so I trust you because you're also a human. But then figuring out like, you're not a human, are you? You're some sort of demon monster. It's just, I don't like, it's putting that trust, making you trust something and believing that it's completely fine and normal, and then just taking that away and making me just wet myself with fear. I don't like it. It's just
very fair. I think monster movies are like, I'll probably say about every subgenre, oh, monster movies are my favorite horror movie, but monster movies are like, when you get a good monster, there is nothing quite like it. But I think personally, like, separate to you guys, my favorite monster movies, and the ones that really scare me, are the ones that are so inhuman that it's incomprehensible. I love things where it's like original designs and it looks like nothing I've ever seen before, and that always scares me the most, because something just doesn't look right. When you see a spider, and like people's visceral fear of spiders is because their brains process them as looking not right. Like, seeing so many legs just is not right to a human brain. You see insects and you see loads of eggs, like a nasty little shell on them and stuff, and you go, that's not normal. Get the fear response. Like, and having monsters that kind of don't look like anything recognizable, kind of like It, where it talks about being this like massive celestial spacefaring being that takes on the form of a giant spider at the end of the book, because it's the only thing the human brain can comprehend. I feel like that's kind of how I approach a monster movie. I'm like, oh, if it doesn't look anything like a human, I'm very scared, because it's just something about that really gets me. I think like alien horror being one of my biggest actual real life fears is what plays into it, because I'm like, oh my God, anything could be out there in the universe. I don't know. perhaps, I don't know, more therapy. But I like, yeah, alien stuff, blobby stuff. My favorite movie monster, which I'm never sure if I feel like I've seen too much of or if I've seen just the right amount of, is The Ritual, with the Jotun at the end of that. Now, if you haven't seen The Ritual, watch that and then come back. But for those of you who have seen The Ritual, the Jotun in that is like this massive, it looks like a deer. It's based on kind of like Norse mythology. It has like a little face in it and human arms, kind of upon where a normal face would be, and it looks disgusting and freakish and is malicious. It's nasty. It pins things to trees. It's horrible. And that just stuck with me for ages afterwards, because I wasn't sure if I found it funny or if I was really, really scared of it. It like walked that line for me because it was so unlike anything I'd ever seen before, but it's such a fantastic monster because of it. I don't know, I find it interesting that that both of you are like, the humanity of monsters is what really gets me. And I'm like, oh God, it's the big deer. It's the big deer.
I must admit though, the monster in The Ritual, like, because it has those human aspects, that it did disturb me. Like, I completely agree with you. When I first saw it, I was like, what the hell is that? And I remember watching it with brother, we were like, what a stupid monster. And then when you sort of finally fully see it come into fruition, I was like, don't
That's
like
horrid,
that,
yeah.
because there is just like this humanoid, like, you know, the fact that it has like human arms kind of, no, I didn't like it either. I just no. No.
That's the other side of the coin for me, I think, when you get to sort of that element of horror that you can't comprehend and is more or less like a force of nature. For me, it is the ones that reflect humanity or kind of distort humanity that kind of get under my skin. But on the other side of that, it is the animalistic side of it, the force of nature side of it. And this is going to be a weird comparison, but bear with me for 1 second. But that reminds me, Ash, your description there reminds me of why I don't like The Ruins, or why I do like the movie The Ruins, but I'm scared of it because it's just kind of like that thing that's almost... It's sort of, you can see what it is. It's rooted in our kind of like reality, but at the same time, it is vicious and it is unknowable and it is kind of, you know, strange and weird and odd and so far removed from what we think of as possible, I suppose, that the vines in The Ruins is like one of my favorite horror monsters, even though it is just a bunch of vines, but there's something to it. There's something in the fact that it is so noble and so strange. It's something you haven't really seen before or thought about as being a threat, I suppose, that when it is made scary, it is made doubly effective.
I think my whole thing with monstrous humanity, I feel like I've seen a lot of the very pale person with dark eyes and long limbs, and I do find that incredibly scary. I think it's incredibly effective when used right. Like, look at the end of Wreck, and you know how much power that sort of body can wield. But I feel like the monstrous humanity side I've seen a lot of in horror, and it's a really good example for it to dig in with me. I think what you talk about, the animalistic side of human stuff, Josh, I think that probably resonates more with me than I don't know, corrupted humanity. I think is really interesting. The Fly is one of my favorites, absolutely, as well. But I don't know, just the weirder the better. The weirder the better. I watched Jack Brooks' Monster Slayer the other day, and watching. Have you guys seen this?
I have no.
It's a weird little movie. Someone recommended it to me, and I was like, "Ooh, what the hell is this?" And it's got Robert Englund in it, and Jack Brooks is a monster slayer. I don't recommend it as a great movie. It's not a great movie, but the monsters in it are fantastic. Because Robert Englund kind of devolves into this big demon by the end of the film. They're not the monsters aren't in it enough for me to recommend it to you, but he does turn into a big demon by the end of the film, and it's like this big, like gelatinous. Kind of like his mouth has grown to have massive like teeth in, and he's just turned into this, again, a blob. It's a scary blob. That's the thing that's got me again. Like, he's turns into this, it's this inhuman form where he doesn't really have limbs. He has tendrils coming out of his mouth, and like he's just about consuming people. And he was a great monster that kind of balanced the transformation of human into something inhuman, whilst like corrupted humanity sort of thing, but pushed it so far the other way that I was like, this is something that I could never see like a body turning into, that it's impressive. And I'm like, oh, that's really weird and unsettling. Like, there's other monsters in it that are all very human. Like, there's kind of like a cyclopsy one, and two people who are corrupted and just have like lots of prosthetics on, and they're all really well designed. They're really, really good, but it's the Robert Englund just looking so strange, but still having human eyes is kind of the weird part of it that probably plays into it the best. But yeah, just a good one that I thought throw in there as a good little monster.
I totally get, like when I'm talking about like the stuff that scares me, it is actually more or less that. For me, I really don't like the overused trope of the real monster was the humans the whole time, like that.
Yeah.
Man, I've like seen that far too much. I've even seen, like the gangly kind of like Rex style humans, but not humans. For me, it's when something is like definitively a human and then transforms into something else, like Robert Englund here, or like, when you get to like the Thing in the Thing, or even I watched the Beach House at the weekend, and the monsters, spoilers I guess, but not really, the things in that movie that eventually kind of like come from people, like they are so far transformed, they are so far distorted that they are kind of like these incomprehensible things, these proper monsters. There's very little of the humanity left, and I think it is that kind of leap from one to the other, like totally and utterly, and the little mini transformations in between that like gets me, the complete distortion of it, not just like you said, a person with a bit of makeup on and like a top hat and then a cane. I don't know why he's got a cane. I'm thinking of the Crooked Man. I don't know if the Crooked Man has a cane.
Scary as well. Like, the thing is, one of again, two of them, I've like, just to undo my point a little bit, because when it's done right and it's done well, it is incredibly scary. Slender Man really got me, not the film, but the creepypasta in general really got to me, because I hated that as this being that was like 8 foot tall with no face and like tentacles for arms that would pin you to a tree. I think it's forest horror that gets me. If there's something's in a forest and it's kind of inhuman, I'm like, ooh, no, take it back, nature, have it, it's yours. Slender Man definitely did that, I think. But like for my favorite ever monsters definitely is stuff like the Rancor from Star Wars. It's stuff like Pacific Rim with massive like kaijus coming out, and Godzilla. Like, I love things that aren't, but I guess that maybe they aren't quite as scary unless they're put in the right setting. But that is definitely the sort of monster I would feel drawn to. So I guess that kind of raises the question to ask you guys: would you rather an incredible monster in a less scary movie, something like big and fantastical and monster oriented, or would you want a scary movie with a more subtle monster that you feel fits the like horror better? What would you be drawn to if I say a monster movie?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I feel like one half of like, I imagine a bunch of people watching this aren't necessarily interested in a horror monster scaring them. It's more like the mythology behind it, or like the lore behind it. And I think that's what like Del Toro movies do really well. Those monsters might, be scary and have really creepy designs, but more importantly, you could tell that he's a director fascinated with the logistics and the ecology and the biology of these beings, and trying to, properly dive into that and give us something interesting that we haven't seen before, and that has this whole story behind it, this whole backstory, this whole mythology. And for me, there is part of me that's interested in that, but for me, when it comes to horror movies, I'm more interested in a story than mythology, if that makes sense. I'm more interested in how they're used in the now, rather than kind of what they represent or what their wider backstory is. So for me, it would be a scary, subtler monster rather than a big, interesting monster. Again, it's not one or the other, you know what I mean? Like, not to go back to Underwater, which we do every single podcast, but I'm bringing it back. There's the monsters in there, that I would argue they're not necessarily scary, but they were so interesting to kind of like watch.
I was scared. The big one. I was scared.
Well, right, okay, this is a question I have for you guys. At some point, the monsters get so big that they stop being scary for me. They get too tall, and I'm like, no, you're not freaking me out, because you could stamp on me and I'd be dead instantly. Where's the fear of being stamped on? I don't know. I'm scared of my body changing into the Thing. I'm not scared of being stepped on by a
Josh,
big god.
No. Think of that moment. Think of it in the mist, where they go out into the mist, they're in their car, they're going out in there. Oh my God, what's all these crazy monsters we've seen? We've seen the arachno lobsters with their like spider claws. We've seen the evil actual spiders. We've seen the bugs. Wow, they're all quite big, but they're small fry comparatively. Interesting, fine, whatever. Scary for Josh maybe. But then you come in and the behemoth, and I always forget how to say that word, is standing in front of you. They drive out and their camera pans up and you see this giant beast, and you realize quite how big the scale of these monsters are. Oh, I've never felt a drop in my stomach like it. Like that's scary.
Right, you know what, Ash, for me, I agree. In that moment, you'd be like, oh my God, that is huge. But at the same time, I think there'd be a sense of relief. I'd be like, oh, we're done. You know what I mean? There's no coming back from this. This is the cut-off point. Like, there's no point me even trying. I might as well just let him stamp on me now. Let him eat me up, because look at the scale of that thing. It's almost unwinnable when it gets to that point. And
look how it goes for them.
There's a lot of horror to be mined for that, but me personally, I can appreciate it more than I can be scared by it, I guess.
Yeah, that's
yeah. No,
fair.
so I think it's a bit of a difficult one, because I believe that horror is down to what scares you, and it's difficult, because like when I go to watch a horror film, like I don't go in watching hoping for it to have a monster in it, because you don't have to have a monster in a horror film for it to be scary. But if it does have a monster in it that scares me as a person, not as scary in general, but it's something that scares me, then yeah, it's scary. And that's what I'll definitely sort of go down that route. If I click on if I'm scrolling through Netflix and I see a picture of a monster that I'm like, well, that's terrifying, then I'm going to go watch it. But it's difficult, because it's you don't want to have too much monster in it. You have to have a happy medium. It's like looking at Haunting of Hill House, like when that that really creepy bowler hat floaty ghost came in, like that was scary anyway, watching The Haunting of Hill House, because what was happening was scary. They had really brilliant jump scares, the story was scary, so I was already invested. But then the moment that bloody ghost came in and was just floating down the hallway, and he was really tall and gangly, that was it. I was like, no, this is terrifying. This has gone from being like, oh, this is good, I'm enjoying this is scary, to no, I'm gonna have nightmares. And that's brilliant. That's what I want from a horror movie. Is like, I want it to be scary, and if you'd want to introduce a monster, that's fine. Because sometimes it can make it even worse in a good way. Yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult one, but I think it does depend on what you're scared of, because, talking about the size of things, when you think of like War of the Worlds, when you've got these massive monsters and the mist, that doesn't scare me, because things like aliens and things like that's just not what I'm scared of. However, things like Jaws, with a massive, huge shark, which, as fake as it looks, is still terrifying. And even one of the top grossing horror movies of all time, The Meg.
Meg's scary, big shark.
Or taking something that is already terrifying, especially to people that have a fear of the ocean and sharks like me, and making it even bigger, is my worst nightmare. It's my absolute worst nightmare, and it's the reason I don't go on cruises and things, because I'm just so scared that I'm just gonna see just a massive shark, and I don't like it. Okay, but I think that's the thing with horror and monsters. It's for one person, it's like when you look at It and Pennywise. To some people, it's even the old It with Tim Curry as Pennywise, that's still terrifying to some people. But to others who don't have a traumatic fear of clowns, it's just like, I mean, yeah, it's okay, but it's not scary. I mean, the newer ones are definitely scary, even if you don't have a fear of clowns. But looking back at the old It, it's like, it's not scary. If anything, it's boring. But if you have a really bad fear of clowns, like, there's probably so many people that have been absolutely scarred for life by lovely old Tim Curry in just basically just a normal little clown outfit. There's nothing scary about him, but to some people,
his
that's
teeth,
terrifying.
Kirsten, man. His teeth, he's definitely look normal there.
True. But in otherwise appearance, comparing the old Pennywise to the new Pennywise, there's a massive like horror difference there. Like from the first initial, before they start transforming into very scary monsters. It's just, if you don't have a fear of clowns, that's fine. But if you do, then it's like, nope, that's terrifying. I'm going to have nightmares for weeks, probably the rest of my life. So it depends on the person, I think.
I think it is funny how you can sort of contextualize that stuff. You know what I mean? Like you mentioned there, being scared of Jaws because you're scared of the ocean and stuff. For me, I'm scared of flying. So when it comes to that Twilight Zone episode and the movie, I think it's Nightmare at 30,000 feet or whatever, and the little monster on the side of the wing, taking the plane down. That monster in any of the context probably wouldn't frighten me, but when you tie that creepy imagery with a fear of flying and a fear of that happening anywhere, like it becomes something that resonates with you. And now that is, I remember being so scared about that. I remember being even scared of the Simpsons parody of that when you've got the actual gremlin on the wing. Like both of those things properly traumatized me growing up. It did not help with this fear of flying that I have anyway.
I think monsters absolutely, like probably what should have been reinforced a little bit more by us throughout is that they are the boiling down of society's biggest fears at any point, like fear of flying, fear of the ocean, something massive and unseen, being in the massive unseen ocean, having that like thalassophobic kind of effect on people is like, it boils it down, doesn't it? Stuff has always been representative, and like the only one I've got left on my mind at the moment is Kong Skull Island, the mother long legs, the big spider, fear of spiders, that's that one. But yeah, no, I think that they always the best monsters find something that we're all scared of, or that is like a collective primal fear, the dark, like big sounds. I don't know. I'm trying to think of primal fears now. I know babies are inherently scared of really loud noises, is why I bring that one up. And I think that kind of is used in horror with like jump scares and like smash effects and sort of thing. But yeah, I think that films that take that and go, right, what are the primal fears of humanity? How can we distill that into a monster and kind of reflect it back out and like represent something? I think is what makes the best monsters. So we can talk about, you know, the size, the humanity, the this, the that, the other about it all day, but the best ones are the ones that take something that you go, oh, that makes me uncomfortable, and then project it in the correct way. And I think for me, that would be ones that have like mythology and backstories and are built up to be these strange, maybe unknowable, maybe you don't know any of it, but it's all been written there for them. These like entities that are ancient and kind of, maybe it's like an inherent fear of nature coming back to claim Earth and things we can't understand because, you know, the Earth does not belong to us. Maybe it's that kind of fear that boils down into that sort of thing that I enjoy. But I think corrupted humanity is absolutely a massive one, and you get some of the best monsters from it because body horror is inherently scary. We've got one body and it's all very squishy. So watching something horrible happen to it is the worst thing possible. And like ghost realms and people getting possessed, absolutely. So to round this whole thing off, if you've got any more monsters you want to shout out, now is the time, my friends. Do you have any more recommended monsters or favorite monster movies, or just any monstrous chat you want to add?
It's a classic, but I can't not go with this entire podcast without mentioning properly Freddy Krueger, because the Nightmare on Elm Street series was the series that got me into horror. I remember tracking all those things down on kind of VHS, and the evolution of that character like throughout you know, all of those movies is so fascinating to watch him transform from this kind of really scary force of nature to this wisecracking banter hound towards the end. But I feel like just the idea of having a monster that invades your dreams, like that is inherently so scary. And again, I was not only scared of Freddy Krueger, but I was scared of the Freddy Krueger episode in The Simpsons, which is when you can tell that something has really scared me if it gets me in the Simpsons parody as well. But I feel like, there's something so spooky about that and not being in control. I think a lot of the things that we've touched on here is like not being in control, whether it's not being in control of your own body, not being in control of your own dreams, not being in control of where you live, the earth, you know, your role in the cosmos or whatever. And I feel like nothing taps into that more than someone invading your dreams, which are inherently private, inherently personal, like only tied to you, a space that is sacred to like you, that you can't share. And then to get her out of that, not only because Freddy Krueger himself has this like great makeup, has this iconic, you know, finger knives as well, has a pretty interesting backstory when it's not getting completely mangled towards the end, and also has this great performance from Robert Englund, who, you know, retains some humanity to the role. Like I've said at the beginning that I don't usually kind of like that stuff where it is sort of just like a man in a costume, but Robert Englund, I think, is one of the exceptions where he manages to have his cake in England.
That's a costume with a man inside. Like that's not a man in a costume. He's like, exactly. He embodies it so well.
Yeah, totally. So like, that was one of the few where I've properly like gotten into the mythology of it. Like I said, that's not usually my thing, but I was so fascinated by him as a character growing up that it got me into, you know, more horror movies. And it was ultimately the thing I had to investigate to get over my fear of him, because once I felt like in the movies themselves, once I felt like I knew him more, I felt like I could control it more, I felt like I had more sway over it rather than him just being this horrible demon who was invading my dreams and I was scared to go to sleep.
How about you, Kirsten?
Well, I'm just going to shout out some of the monsters that scared me in films that probably, like, some people are like, oh, that's not a scary film, but because it's a monster that scared me, I didn't like it. And that's got to be Mama in Mama, because I hated the way she looked. She was just too long and gangly and creepy, and it's not a great film, but it was terrified me because I didn't like how she looked. Then there's the monsters in Grave Encounters as well. There's a few very long people in that scared me. There's obviously the Crooked Man, and I did have another one, Mama from Mama, and also, yes, the Blair Witch remake. She does make a little appearance in the end, and they say about her being like really tall and gangly and stuff, and I was like, oh, I don't remember that in the original. And then when you finally see her, I was like, no, and just actually thinking like that's what she looked like. Hated it. So yes, if you like me, are scared by corrupt, freaky, normal people, there's some good ones to scare the pants off of you, because I hated them.
Kirsten, are you just scared of tall people like Peter Crouch?
I think, do you know what? I was just thinking about that. I was like, I wonder, because what scares me about these people is when, you know, when they're like walking through a door, but they have to kind of like bend down and kind of like crawl through it because they're so tall. I was thinking, like, if I ever came across like an 8 foot tall, just a normal person, and they were like, oh, sorry, and had to like crouch down through a door, would that scare me? Because I think it might. I think some part of me might be like, hey, no, get back in. Like,
horror is corrupted you, man.
I hate it. I know, it is. Like, if I ever see a tall person now, I'm just gonna be like, no, just start shaking in the corner. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like the crawling through normal sized things. It's just, no, you fit or you don't. Stop.
I think an interesting one for Blair Witch, actually, just to like add to this scary bit of it. Like, obviously you see the long stretched woman as like the witch near the end. Apparently that isn't actually the Blair Witch. That is like, it's Ellie Kedward's body, who many assume to be the Blair Witch. But the screenwriters, I think Simon Barrett, kind of wanted to imply that it was the body of Ellie Kedward, but the witch was controlling it. So you still don't know what the witch looks like, but she can take possession of like strange, because obviously Ellie Kedward, when she was killed in the Blair Witch, they talk about her hanging her with like rocks to her limbs, so she gets all stretched out. So it's like her remains reanimated, and the witch is still out there controlling different things, doing different stuff, and could look like anything and be really, really strange. So I love that. I love that little piece of mythology horror for that monster, because I think it's so good. For me, the last ones I have to end like both some Christmas horror movies, because they have the best monsters. Is Gremlins, which are brilliant, funny rather than scary, but still the whole Mogwai versus Gremlin dichotomy, I don't like it. It's unnerving thinking of the transformation into something evil. I look at like my beautiful little cat and think, ooh, what could happen if you were eating after midnight? And Pumpkinhead, I think, is so good and so scary, but that kind of maybe fits the humanoid corruption sort of thing. I know he's a demon, but he does have like, you know, he's quite a humanoid figure, but then is made creepy. But Pumpkinhead is fantastic and underrated. And Gillman, because you got to bring up Gillman, got to have a little bit of Creature from the Black Lagoon, you know, love Gillman. So there are some more monsters to end on. Right, I'm going to wrap up this monster pod. So for those watching, tell us your favorite monster, please. Let's rack up a lovely list of great monster movies and great monsters in the comments. So drop one down there for us, and talk to us at What Culture Horror Twitter as well. We're at W Culture Horror on Twitter, and you can find me at Ash Millman. You can find Kirsten at
Kirsten Ria with 2 A's,
and you can find Josh
at Josh Brune with 2 O's.
Lovely. So you can talk to us on there as well. Yeah, let us know your favorite monsters. Talk about our monsters as well, if there are any that we've spoken about that really get you. Are you scared of jelly? Because I am. I'm definitely scared of jelly. And yeah, just let us know that sort of thing as well. We'll be back next week. There'll be more horror pods to come with very scary content. But for now, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.